Every year, AO3, which, for the dudes that make up 96% of my viewer base, is the world's largest fanfic repository, publishes a list of the 100 most popular ships in the past 12 months. And in its latest statistics, the glorious 57th spot is occupied by none other than Seishiro Nagi / Reo Mikage. And just for reference, AO3 covers not just the weeb sphere, but every conceivable fandom, from Harry Potter to Stranger Things to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And last year, Nagi Reo was more popular than Kirk / Spock, Naruto / Sasuke, Obi-Wan Kenobi / Anakin Skywalker, or Zoro / Sanji. So basically, in the shipping scene, Blue Lock is punching way above its weight class. Our edgy football comic has only a fraction of the fan base of these titanic franchises, and yet it inspired thousands of fans to imagine romantic encounters between its characters. I'm sure this doesn't come as a surprise to many of you. After all, there's a lot of overt queer coding throughout Blue Lock, with Nagi and Reo's relationship only being the most blatant example. And that really begs the question, why is that the case? Now, I've seen people argue that the quote-unquote queerbaiting is simply a means to appeal to a female demographic. Put in a bit of sexual tension between cute boys, and those silly teenage girls will gobble it up. Hook, line, and sinker. However, I've always found this an extraordinarily reductive and uninteresting explanation, and not to say incredibly sexist as well. So instead, this video is an attempt to show that Blue Lock's queer elements are meaningful and that exploring them enriches our understanding of the story. And to do so, I've enlisted the help of Reilly, who actually proposed this idea to me and served as an absolutely fantastic co-writer for the video. This project would have never come to fruition without all of his input, and I really enjoyed working together with him over the past few months.
Hi friends, I am really excited to join Sean on this video. I have never really worked on a YouTube video before, but I've wanted to explore this idea since my first read-through, so I'm really grateful to Sean for letting me work on this with him. It's been such a fun experience, and I'm also really grateful for all of you for letting me join in the space of Blue Lock analysis. On my first read-through of Blue Lock, around the second selection, I slowly started to notice casual instances of queerness between characters. So much so that after I finished the U20 match, I posted to the Blue Lock Reddit a question like, does anyone else notice the queerness in Blue Lock? And I'm not just talking about Sheeta. Yet, that post was immediately taken down because it broke the thirsting rule, one saying you may only bring up topics pertaining to a character's sexuality on so-called Thirsty Thursdays. Now, it's my fault I broke the rule, but that phrasing really rubbed me the wrong way. Only allowing discussions about queerness in text to occur on one day of the week is bad enough. But even worse, Thirsty Thursday is dedicated to thirsting over these characters. By only allowing discussions about queerness to occur on the day dedicated to sexualizing these characters infers that a character's sexuality can only be talked about when trying to sexualize them. It essentially reduces all instances of queerness in Blue Lock to a kind of fan service, rather than as an aspect of storytelling that reinforces the ideas that Blue Lock is trying to present.
Now, I imagine many of my regular viewers might balk at this topic. You might be thinking, Blue Lock isn't a queer story. It's a manly manga for manly teenage boys who have no interest in seeing Nagi and Reo make out whatsoever. So stop forcing a gay agenda onto my football comic. But in my view, this is an incredibly restrictive perspective. In fact, every time I chatted with Reilly about the queer elements in Blue Lock, I've become increasingly convinced that the manga becomes way more interesting if you look at it through a queer lens. And as you might surmise from the video's length, there's a lot to be unpacked here. I even feel like we've only managed to scratch the surface on the topic. This certainly won't be, or even could be, an overview of every single queer moment in Blue Lock. Rather, our aim is to show different angles through which the topic can be approached, and to re-examine familiar material through a fresh perspective. a perspective that offers a unique way to tell queer stories while also giving a hopeful alternative to how we understand queerness in real life.
Our goal in this video is not to try and definitively prove to what extent different Blue Lock characters experience same-sex desire. Rather, it's how observing queerness between characters ties together multiple themes, such as beauty and desirability, dominance and submission, wanting to be with someone versus wanting to be them, and not to mention one of the most unhealthy, complex, yet endearing relationships in all of shonen manga, and that includes Gon and Killua. Additionally, we'll have a light look at the history of sports through a queer lens, and how the Blue Lock world differs from our real life, which has had societal patriarchy shape the way we expect athletes to look and behave. When we say things like dominance and submission and desire, we do not use them in a purely sexual connotation. Instead, we refer to the complex interpersonal relationships and emotions that drive these players to become the greatest footballer they can be. That is also why we use the term queer rather than, for instance, gay. Our purpose isn't to definitively pin down the sexual preferences of the Blue Lock characters. Queerness, on the other hand, brings out an element of fluidity beyond the rigid boundaries of binary sexual identities.
Let me start with an observation that I'm certainly not the first to have made. For a story that advocates giving your own selfish desires pride of place, Blue Lock sure pays a lot of attention to couples. Nagi and Reo, Saya and Shido, Kaiser and Ness, Snuffy and Mick, Isagi and Bachira, Isagi and Rin, Isagi and Kurona, Isagi and Hiyori, Isagi and Kaiser. The world's greatest egoist can't be monogamous, I guess. Now, okay, that might seem like a cheap shot, so let's take it a step further with an example of how this focus on duos actually generates meaning in the story. In the second selection, the series' focus shifts from team dynamics to individual players. And from its onset, Jinpachi Ego proclaims that this second selection isn't about a single individual turning 0 to 1 anymore. Instead, the key to clearing the second selection is creating chemical reactions between individual egoists. So we're starting off the arc with the programmatic claim that its main focus will be the chemistry between players. But that sense of chemistry is also reflected in the arc's two most important character storylines. For the entirety of the second selection, we essentially follow, compare, and contrast the breakups of the two most prominent duos so far, Isagi and Bachira and Nagi and Reo. Moreover, these storylines are frequently presented in terms that at least evoke romantic relationships. For instance, Reo is in the pits because he was rejected by Nagi, as a spurned lover of sorts who wasn't chosen by the object of his affections. All this is set against the backdrop of an arc that at its core interrogates what it means to have chemistry with another person. From the first match against Rin showing that the chemistry between Isagi and his original teammates isn't sufficient to come out on top against Blue Lock's top 3, to the 3v3 where the balanced teamwork of Kunigami, Chigiri, and Reo ultimately falls short compared to the chemical reactions that come about from Isagi and Baro devouring each other reciprocally. And this lesson is basically affirmed at the end of the match. The key to clearing the second selection is to bring about the kinds of chemical reactions that they've produced through their dysfunctional, unpredictable team dynamic. And as an aside here, let's be real, having these guys constantly talking about wanting to devour each other seems kinda gay in its own right. Anyways, all these ideas come to a head in the 4v4, a match that from the onset is framed as Isagi's attempt to get back with his lost partner. But as the match unfolds, it calls into question whether there's still merit to this relationship at all, since Bachira is no longer keeping up with his former partner. That's also why Nagi had to be the one to deal the fatal blow, telling Bachira that he's no longer a desirable teammate. In this arc, he's the one who best understands the value of cutting off an unsatisfying relationship. But in the end, both Bachira and Isagi reaffirm their value to one another. Bachira's awakening unequivocally shows why he's a worthy partner, and Isagi in turn proves that he alone understands Bachira on a deeper level. And as a result, the two haven't just reaffirmed their relationship. They've left behind the codependency that characterized both of them at the start of the arc, and in its place, learned how to fight on their own so that they can now finally surpass Rin as a duo. When I was rereading this section of the story for this video, Bachira's final words to Isagi actually really jumped out to me. "I've learned to fight without you, but it's way more fun with you around. Anyways, let's keep having fun." Like, this is some legitimately sound advice for how to foster a healthy romantic relationship. One that doesn't rely on one person using the other as an emotional crutch like was the case for both characters at the start of the arc. And so, they're allowed to renew their relationship as teammates once more as the capstone of this entire storyline. So in short, the romantic subtexts between Isagi and Bachira, Nagi and Reo in the second selection aren't just a bit of spice peppered on top of an otherwise aromantic story arc. Rather, the second selection presents its lessons about the different types of relationships and chemistry as a core part of Isagi's development through story beats that have been practically lifted from the realm of romance, to the point that I couldn't envision Isagi becoming the world's best striker without having experienced this quote-unquote romance with Bachira.
Sean just perfectly explained how chemical reactions and breakups not only highlight casually queer elements within Blue Lock, but also push the players to become better versions of themselves by interrogating the ways they need to grow. Just like in real life, Blue Lock's breakups provide opportunities for self-reflection and growth. Yet since the second selection, the manga also highlights other avenues where romantic experiences can bring about growth. For many adolescents, their first crushes lead them to interrogate and reshape their personal identity. Essentially, a desire to be with someone might manifest as a desire to be like the object of your affection. Think about how in real life people start to dress like their crushes, or copy their music taste, or even take on aspects of the crush's personality that they admire. Sometimes they're not even self-aware of what they're doing, but they just like the person so much they wish to emulate them. Blue Lock, similarly, construes the way its players bond as a way to catalyze their emotions into on-field development as a romantic coming-of-age of sorts. Isagi's adaptability constantly makes him want to take on aspects of the strikers he admires. Isagi marvels at Rin's talent, but he doesn't just want to watch Rin from afar, but be the closest person to Rin until the day he overtakes him. Especially in the U20 match, Isagi gradually catches up to Rin by becoming more and more like his idol, to the point that Isagi and Rin are virtually indistinguishable in its latter sections. However, too much fixation on another person can be detrimental, and Isagi has to recognize this when failing to emulate physical qualities he doesn't have. Isagi's obsession with becoming Kaiser doesn't fully serve him until he realizes he can't replicate the Kaiser impact, but instead, he unlocks his own version of an unstoppable shot in addition to the advanced spatial awareness he copied from Kaiser. Instead of wanting to be Kaiser, Isagi doubles down into his own playstyle that eventually brings him to Kaiser's level. All of this has culminated in the most recent chapters, where Kaiser and Isagi, while still not necessarily playing together, are at least synergizing, and you can finally say they're playing on the same team.
Blue Lock further adds to this theme by including another type of want, wanting to destroy someone. Dramatic iterations of this can be seen with stalkers who say things like, "If I can't have you, no one can." But in Blue Lock, not only is the concept of destroying those you care about encouraged, but in order to do so, oftentimes the player must take on desired aspects of their target. Isagi's match against Naruhaya in the 2v2 really puts this into the forefront, but throughout Blue Lock, players will praise an opponent's skills, wish they had the same talent, and then aim for their destruction, all within the same breath. Another prominent example is Barrow's obsession with destroying Isagi since the second selection. For instance, the start of the Ubers match suggests that love and hate are two sides of the same coin. When Barrow dyed his hair before facing Isagi, he treats this as a celebration of dominance, a mark that he has come to severely outrank his rival. Yet, from an outsider perspective, the sudden attention to his appearance is a telltale sign that Barrow is trying to impress his crush. Or look at Reo after he was left behind by Nagi in the second selection. In the wake of this humiliating rejection, Reo's feelings for Nagi warp into a desire to take down his former partner. As an act of vengeance, Reo becomes a toxic ex of sorts who is hell-bent on making Nagi admit that he's utterly reliant on him. In other words, if he can't have Nagi, he'll tear Nagi down with him. But as the story progresses and Reo becomes increasingly cognizant of the insurmountable gap between himself and Nagi, there's a significant shift in Reo's desires. After coming to terms with the reasons why Nagi left him behind, Reo vows that he'll prove himself to be the only one who can stand beside Nagi. So Reo's want to destroy transforms into a want to be with, but note the ultimate manifestation of this desire. When he's subbed into the U20 match, Reo puts his new chameleon style on display in a very conspicuous manner, by perfectly reenacting Nagi's signature shot. As Reilly has noted, mimicking the object of your affection is a telltale sign of an awkward first crush, and Reo is perhaps the perfect embodiment of this. Reo's entire character arc revolves around figuring out how he should relate to Nagi, and in the match that serves as the payoff to Blue Lock's first 3 arcs, he manages to posit an effective answer. By striving to embody Nagi, his figurative love at first sight, as closely as he possibly can. So I hope we've shown that this is a pervasive interest throughout Blue Lock. And more than that, it's almost as if Ego purposefully wants the Blue Lockers to cycle between all 3 states of want in order to facilitate different motivating factors for growth. Its strikers play differently depending on if they want to impress someone, emulate them, or destroy them. And these shifts are crucial elements in the development of the Blue Lock cast.
But let's zoom out a bit. We're not just doing a queer reading of a manga, we're doing a queer reading of a sports manga, and that matters quite a bit. Sports, both in real life and in fiction, are settings bristling with sexual tensions. I can say with confidence that people who claim there is no queerness or sexuality in sports are ignoring an obvious facet of life. Think of some of the earliest examples of organized sports, wrestling in ancient Greece. 2 men, oiled up and naked, grappling the other to submission. How do you look at that and say there's no homoerotic overtones? Or American football itself, where one of the most important relationships is between the center, the player who snaps the ball, and the quarterback, which, outside of the shotgun plays, relies on the quarterback getting right up to the butt of the center, placing a firm hand on his ass, you can ask Tom Brady about it, and reaching between the center's legs for the ball. This goes without mentioning homoeroticism that takes place within the locker room or between players. This is not me trying to read same-sex desire into every possible interaction. Instead, it's recognizing the pre-existing queer relationships we already engage in, yet choose to ignore, belittle, or destroy, which ends up harming men in the long run. As the philosopher Michel Foucault explains in Friendship as a Way of Life, there's a plethora of casual public physical contact allowed between women to show love and care for each other that men feel not socially permitted to engage in. Simple things like brushing each other's hair and dressing each other feel taboo among men. These small actions of care really matter, yet the most common places men are allowed to share physical bonds, Foucault claims, are in war and in prison. And as Sean has brought to my attention, the facility's name in kanji reads Blue Prison. Foucault goes on to share the importance of these bonds for morale, camaraderie, and teamwork. From mythical characters like Achilles and Patroclus to ancient Spartans, all the way up to modern-day examples like baseball players slapping each other's asses, casual physical expressions of queerness are ingrained into our society, just like in Blue Locks. But we often overlook it.
So let me just hone in on what is perhaps the manga's most consistent manifestation of the intersection between sports and homoerotic desire. In the world of Blue Lock, as in the real world, talent and abilities don't just make you enviable, but also sexually desirable. Perhaps the most impactful example of this is how Isagi focalizes Rin during their first 3v3. In the most lopsided match so far, Isagi doesn't succumb to anger or despair. Rather, we witness how his eyes and soul are completely enraptured by the beauty of Rin's football. In other words, the meeting with Blue Lock's greatest striker is framed as an instance of love at first sight. And there are plenty of other examples to go around. Shido experiences his first ever chemistry with another player as an intense sexual climax. Aiku says he's aroused, rock hard, when Isagi forces the Ubers to play at the peak of their abilities. And in the Manshine match, Kaiser equates Chigiri's skills with his beauty. Chigiri is fast, tough, and beautiful, all in a neat package. Indeed, Chigiri stands out among the Blue Lock cast through his association with feminine beauty. He has gorgeous long hair that he has been shown to maintain, and he freely responds to the nickname Princess, often exactly at moments when he displays his talents to the fullest. A really interesting example of this came to light in recent chapters. When Kaiser starts cooperating with the other Bastard München players and his and Isagi's attacks start to resonate for the first time, Isagi calls him hot, atsui in Japanese. Similar to English, the adjective atsui can be used for hot temperatures, but also for something you're passionate about, including erotic passions. But if we're looking at Blue Lock specifically, heat carries major significance. As established in the very first chapter, the aim of the entire program is to make Blue Lock the hottest place in the world. And yes, Ego employs the exact same term here as Isagi uses for Kaiser. So in other words, Isagi finds Kaiser hot because the two are finally in sync with each other, but also because Kaiser has risen to unprecedented heights. Don't forget, in Blue Lock, skill equals beauty. And on an overarching level, with Isagi and Kaiser bringing out the best in each other, Blue Lock is becoming a hotter place than ever before. And not just because they're now staring directly into each other's eyes. That's actually a great segue into one of the most fascinating instances of queerness in Blue Lock. The sexual tensions that are very much at the heart of the power struggle between Isagi and Kaiser. The manga hasn't been particularly subtle about their homoerotic chemistry, to the point that even in-universe viewers latch onto the romantic potential of Isagi/Kaiser. Yet at the same time, Blue Lock construes the flirting and other sexual innuendo between Bastard's two aces as a form of power play, and the manga makes it notoriously difficult to determine where the power struggles end and the romantic interplay begins.
This is again in line with tensions in real-life sports, where a myriad of interactions are framed in light of dominant-submissive relationships. Wrestling is the most obvious example, with people literally forced into submission, but all sports that end with a victor and a loser show this link of a team forcing the other team to give. But as Blue Lock often showcases, there are power struggles and games within the game that cause the balance of power to consistently shift, even between teammates, such as Kaiser and Isagi in the NEL or Baro vs Isagi in the 4v4. Unfortunately, in real-life sports environments, we've seen dominant-submissive relationships take place non-consensually under a patriarchal hierarchy. A culture of homophobia and toxic masculinity within sports is easy to see in high school and college hazing rituals. As explained by Dr. Eric Anderson, sports, particularly team sports, traditionally associates boys and men within masculine dominance by constructing their identities and sculpting their bodies to align with hegemonic perspectives of masculine embodiment and expression. This hegemonic theory of masculinity can be seen through examples like the ideal starting quarterback or the ripped bodybuilder. And beyond the physical, these men are expected to behave in a certain way. They are not allowed to show any weakness, they are not allowed to cry, share their feelings, present physically outside the established norm, or even show love and affection. Furthermore, they're encouraged to engage in patriarchal and misogynistic actions in order to show their dominance. If they adhere to these requirements, depending on how successful they are, they will be given social capital, as well as protection from homophobia and harassment. Even further, they would protect their status by harming those at the bottom of the hierarchy who don't have the same masculine qualities or who don't wish to exist within these hierarchies. I grew up playing a whole bunch of sports, and I can personally relay the paradoxically homophobic yet also homoerotic actions taken in the men's locker room. From seemingly harmless whippings of people's butts with towels to more sinister behavior, like I once saw a group of guys jokingly shove a kid into a stall and make him take his pants down, and there's other stuff that I won't go into for the sake of Sean's monetization. While hazing in some environments can be mostly harmless and bring the team together, other times these rituals are cruel and genuinely dangerous, often involving some sort of degrading sexual experience where those in power are allowed to subject the new recruits to their whims. Anderson explains that these behaviors test new recruits' willingness to obey those higher in the power hierarchy, as well as reaffirm them at the bottom of the team's hierarchy. But even further, these hazing traditions allow those in power to safely engage in subversive behavior that they would never usually condone. In other words, it allows people who have homoerotic feelings the permission to act on them while still allowing them to adhere to the homophobic cultural expectations. So when we look at hazing in Blue Lock, it's notable that all the major incidents are initiated by players outside of the Blue Lock ecosystem. Kaiser, of course, comes from a German team, but there's one earlier moment where hierarchy and sexuality are deeply conflated, during the Blue Lockers' first experience with the outside world in their showdown against the World 5. The World players not only discourage the entire concept of Blue Lock staking a claim in the World stage, but also represent a more aggressive sexual lifestyle than the Blue Lockers. Upon first seeing them, the characterization of the World 5 players is distinct from the Blue Lockers. They are among the few to openly desire sleeping with women, and once Rin scores, they immediately crush our protagonists, intimidating them with their play to show just how far the distance in talent is between the top and where Blue Lock is now. Rin, the only Blue Locker still fighting back, has a fire in his eyes that Luna expresses the desire to thoroughly crush. He immediately nutmegs Rin, and says not to leave his legs open or else they'll think he's an easy guy. Luna sexually harasses Rin on the pitch while attempting to emasculate him with a nutmeg. In each of these interactions, the World 5 strikers present themselves as active parties in literal or figurative sexual interactions. Their ability to make love to girls in kimonos or penetrate the Blue Lockers' legs consolidates their status as a global elite who can enact their sexual desires upon the inhabitants of this perceived helpless island nation. In short, the World 5's remarkable focus on sexuality serves to enforce their place in the hierarchy. Luna on top, Rin below.
We see this homoerotic interplay through a patriarchal binary between dominant and submissive parties reflected in the evolving dynamic between Isagi and Kaiser over the course of the NEL. When Bastard's Emperor first meets Isagi, he knocks Isagi's shot off target, thereby placing Isagi at the bottom of the pecking order. Right after, he draws Isagi in as if he's going for a kiss, and subsequently takes hold of his arms while whispering sweet nothings like, "I want to get in the way of your life," into his ears. It's a classic instance of sex as a metaphor for power. Kaiser is in complete control of the German team, and that is communicated by introducing him as a dominant lover who can place Isagi in a wholly submissive position. We see something very similar right before the Manshine match. There's a falling out between Isagi and Yukimiya, and Kaiser comes in to seduce Yukimiya onto his side. And look at how Kaiser enters the scene. He's the only one naked, flaunting his chiseled abs for everyone to see, in contrast to the modestly clothed Blue Lock boys. So when Kaiser tells the newcomers to follow the right ruler, read the Emperor himself, he does so in a setting where he projects full confidence in himself, his desirability, and his dominant position. Kaiser purposefully presents himself as a sex symbol, right before the match against a team that's out to acquire the perfect body. This idea is reinforced in the early stages of the Manshine match as well. When Shigiri scores the first goal, Kaiser immediately comments on Shigiri's attractiveness, both as a striker and as a person, and threatens Isagi that he might lose interest in him if he doesn't get his act together. So in both scenes, Kaiser projects himself as the undisputed object of affection, the alpha male who can choose among a myriad of readily available lovers. But over the course of the Manshine match, Isagi catches up to Kaiser and even briefly ekes out a victory over his rival. And that is underpinned by recasting Isagi as the dom in this figurative relationship. This page serves as a clear parallel to Kaiser flirting with Isagi in his original introduction. The power dynamic has fundamentally shifted, with Isagi on top and Kaiser at the bottom. It's no coincidence then that in the aftermath of the Manshine match, Kaiser suddenly stops expecting Isagi to pine for him. Instead, he's suddenly become the one chasing after Isagi, in his own twisted ways. The romantic undercurrents of this scene are especially brought to the fore by Nessa's reaction, who seethes with envy because he's being supplanted in Kaiser's affections. This reversal of who is chasing after whom is also reflected on the pitch. I discussed this in greater detail in my video on the irrationality of Isagi versus Kaiser, but to put it briefly, at the start of the NEL, Isagi has indeed set his sights on Kaiser. Whether it's to learn the secrets to his success, or to steal the ball from Bastard's ace. However, once Isagi discovers Metavision and closes the gap with his rival, he isn't as preoccupied with Kaiser anymore and stops stealing the ball from his German teammates altogether. Kaiser, on the other hand, barely gives Isagi the light of day at first, but his meddling with Isagi's plays becomes increasingly disruptive once Isagi poses a serious threat to Kaiser's position in the hierarchy. Again, BM's power dynamics are directly reflected in which of the two is giving and receiving attention, who is chasing after, and who is doing the chasing. This goes to the extent that by the time Kaiser hits his low point in the PXG match, Isagi is virtually playing hard to get. He knows that he has Kaiser's undivided attention and relishes the absolute control he holds over the heart of Bastard's ace. That brings us to the more recent manga events. In all honesty, my biggest goosebump moment in the entire PXG match might have been the spread in the aftermath of Kaiser's goal. As noted before, Kaiser's awakening for the first time brought the two in sync, and this equilibrium is reflected in the spread that offers a response to the panels of the two rivals vying for dominance. However, unlike the two previous instances, which cast their rivalry in hierarchical terms with a top and a bottom, a dominant and a submissive party, this final page has them gazing deeply into each other's eyes as equals. In their first meeting, Kaiser placed his thumb on Isagi's mouth without consent. He's invading Isagi's personal space, threatening to kiss him at a moment's notice, all as an assertion of dominance. During the PXG match, on the other hand, Kaiser's finger doesn't touch, but rather seems to beckon, inviting Isagi to consensually close the distance between them. And it's a much more intimate scene as a result. What actually really jumped out to me on this spread was the use of screen tone. Blue Lock normally doesn't use these kinds of intricate tones on its characters' skins. In fact, this style of shading evokes artistic conventions from shoujo manga, which rely way more heavily on patterned tones. And at the risk of resorting to sweepingly reductive simplifications of entire demographics and genders, my read of this marked stylistic choice is that it uses the visual language of a different style of manga to signal a shift away from stereotypically masculine preoccupations with power and conflict to stereotypically feminine preferences for love and harmony.
In Blue Lock, the idea of dominating others is a means of survival, but at the same time, characters like Isagi encourage dominated players to fight back, to show their own dominance in order to grow from each other. This unique nature of Blue Lock's dominant and submissive relationships creates a fluid understanding of who can succeed in the hierarchy. Those in power in the real world use hazing to cement their place in the hierarchy, only allowing those who fit into their definition of success to join them at the top. While Blue Lock certainly encourages a hierarchy based on dominance, it is by no means a fixed system. There is no gradual changing of the guard in Blue Lock. The top striker doesn't get to select his successor based on his adherence to a certain ideology. It is a meritocracy in its purest sense, one far less adherent to historic abuse perpetrated by patriarchal dominance, hence the casually queer nature of the Blue Lock environment. Because this fluid hierarchy seems to be unique even within the universe of Blue Lock, the facility itself acts as a space that more safely allows queer interpersonal relationships to occur, just like Foucault talks about, while simultaneously preparing the Blue Lockers for the possibility that the position at the top can be overthrown and reclaimed at a moment's notice. It is by no means a perfect system. I am sure there could be a plethora of abuse claims levied against Ego and Blue Lock's training regimen, but at least it's an interesting and more emotionally progressive system than ours in reality. In real life, we have created ideals for what we expect out of our sports stars, and those who don't fit into the mold are expected to fail, occasionally for reasons that shouldn't have anything to do with sports. Recently, this has been seen with Caleb Williams, the new Chicago Bears quarterback. In many ways, Williams upholds the qualities that you would want in an ideal quarterback prospect, and yet he has been criticized for his fashion, pink phone case, and painted nails. I think this quote from sports blogger Mike Farrell says it all. Crying in your mom's lap in the stands after a loss, nail polish with opponent disrespect on them, wearing dresses, what appears to be lipstick and a pink phone. It's 2024 and we are all inclusive people, either by choice or out of social conformity. But a football locker room is the opposite. I'm sorry, there's no way to sugarcoat it. There is no inclusion, there is no understanding, and there is no respect for those who are different. Football locker rooms are macho, old school, and unyielding. Simply put, you better be damned good like Dennis Rodman if you're going to be as different as Williams. Even though I probably disagree with a lot of Mike Farrell's opinions, his quote does reflect a cruel realism in the world, which makes the last line ring especially true. You better be damned good like Dennis Rodman if you're going to be as different as Williams. Those who fail in sports are at best forgotten and fade into random trivia questions, but I fear that if Williams fails, there are those out there who will point to every example listed as a reason why he did, and further cement their misogynistic and homophobic views. And yet, winning in sports is a magical power I never underestimate. Caleb Williams is not a perfect symbol, or a queer icon, and he should not be propped up as one. He might not succeed, like a plethora of other top draft picks. And he got drafted to the Bears, which for those who know football is really scary because we've never had a good quarterback. But I am curious about a future where he is good and a gradual shift occurs, showing that there are ways to succeed in sports while not fitting into traditional ideals of masculinity. Blue Lock offers a place where that is already the norm.